8 today, yes?
Yeah, 9, verse 9.
Verse 9. Oh, yes, verse 9. I'm sorry. Verse 9. I looked at that already. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 3, Verse 9. There we are. Rajakamo manum devan niritim dvavicharan. Excuse me. I'll start again. I have a croaky throat this morning. Rajakamo manum devam niritim tvavicharan yajet. Kama kamo yajet somam akama purusham param. Rajakamo manum devan niritim tvabicharan yajet. Kama kamo yajet somam akama purusham param. Okay, word for word. Rajakamaha. Anyone desiring an empire or kingdom. Manum, the Manus, semi-incarnations of God. Devan, demigods. Niritim, demons. Tu, but. Abhicharan, desiring victory over the enemy. Yajet, should worship. Kama kamaha, one who desires sense gratification. Yajet, should worship. Somam, the demigod named Chandra. Akama, one who has no material desires to be fulfilled. Purusham, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Param, the Supreme. Translation. One who desires domination over a kingdom or an empire should worship the Manus. One who desires victory over an enemy should worship the demons. And one who desires sense gratification should worship the moon. But one who desires nothing of material enjoyment should worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport by Srila Prabhupāda. For a liberated person, all the enjoyments listed above are considered to be absolutely useless. Only those who are conditioned by the material modes of external energy are captivated by different types of material enjoyment. In other words, the transcendentalist has no material desires to be fulfilled, whereas the materialist has all types of desires to be fulfilled. The Lord has proclaimed that the materialists who desire material enjoyment and thus seek the favor of different demigods, as mentioned above, are not in control of their senses and so give themselves to nonsense. One should therefore not desire any sort of material enjoyment, being sensible enough to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The leaders of nonsensical persons are still more nonsensical because they preach openly and foolishly that one can worship any form of demigod and get the same result. This sort of preaching is not only against the teachings of Bhagavad Gita or those of the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, but is also foolish, just as it is foolish to claim that with the purchase of any travel ticket, one may reach the same destination. No one can reach Bombay from Delhi by purchasing a ticket to Baroda. It is clearly defined herein that persons impregnated with different desires have different modes of worship, but one who has no desire for material enjoyment should worship the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. And this worshiping process is called devotional service. Devotional service means service to the Lord without any tinge of material desires, including desire for fruitive activity and imperial speculation. For fulfillment of material desires, one may worship the Supreme Lord, but the result of such worship is different, as will be explained in the next verse. Generally, the Lord does not fulfill anyone's material desires for sense gratification, but he awards such benedictions to worshippers of the Lord, for they ultimately come to the point of not desiring material enjoyment. The conclusion is that one must minimize the desires of material enjoyment. And for this, one should worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is described here as Param, or beyond anything material. Sripad Sankaracharya has also stated, Narayana Paro Vyaktat, the Supreme Lord is beyond the material encirclement. So, this is all very clear, I think. Um, Srila Prabhupada makes it clear time and time again in his purports that there is a very stark choice that we can make if we have proper knowledge, complete knowledge. With incomplete knowledge, we simply, under the influence of modes of material nature, make choices for sense gratification. But if we have complete knowledge, understanding that the Supreme Personality of Godhead exists and that we are his eternal parts and parcels, and that our constitutional position is to act as his eternal servants, and that is to gratify his senses, then we can see that we have a choice. Either we stay under the purview of the three modes of material nature, entangled in the repetition of birth and death, pursuing gratification of our senses. Or we can turn away from that and begin to engage our senses in the service of the senses of the Lord. Very simple distinction. Either you can be a material sense gratifier, or you can be a transcendental sense gratifier. The basic result that we have to always take note of very carefully is that entanglement in the repetition of birth and death is the result of the addiction to sense gratification in the material world. Whereas liberation from birth and death, beyond birth and death, is the result of engaging in gratification of the transcendental senses of the Lord. Our basic problem in the material world, the four problems, Srila Prabhupada says that everybody is denying and everybody is avoiding looking for the solution to the problems, are birth, death, old age, and disease. These are the fundamental problems of every living entity in the material world, no matter what form of life we're in. 8,400,000 species of life. Actually, that's inconceivable. And even when we think about the concept of species, in the mundane conception of species through the system that was set up by uh, a Jesuit monk, actually, as I think he was Swedish, a man called Linnaeus. He began trying to categorize the species of life. And he had basically two categorizations. He had uh, what he called the genus and then the species within that genus. So the genus is like dog, canine. So then you have the different species of life, canine, and then the name of whatever that species is. And you see there's practically an infinite variety of dogs. But it's a little confusing when we look at 8,400,000 species. You could say that dog is one species. There are many varieties within that species, but it's just a dog or a cat. So, or in different species of birds and so on. So if you like take that conditioned analysis of genus and species and consider that the genus in the mundane categorization is actually the species, when you think of 8,400,000 species, the variegatedness of the situation is actually inconceivable. So the entanglement that we have in material life is also inconceivably complex. Combine that with the rules of the game, and you have your individual karma also, which complicates the situation. So that by your karma, you may take birth in one species of life thousands of times before a particular karma is balanced out. So the duration of our entanglement in the material world is inestimable and totally incomprehensible. And that's just the past. Due to our karma, we're entangled in the repetition of birth and death already. It's for an inconceivable amount of time into the future. And there's no way out of this. There's no material way out of any of this because in the material situation, we're actually ignorant of this condition. We're actually ignorant of our actual situation until and unless we come in contact with a pure devotee of the Lord and we hear the absolute truth from the lips of a pure devotee. We have no understanding of our actual situation, either in the temporary world or in the spiritual world. Lost, 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 hopelessly lost. So here the distinction is being made very clear, very, very clear. And even if you have, with proper knowledge, you still have material desires. And indeed, that's the situation, because once we enter into the process of bhajana kriya, we realize, oh, there are so many anattas in my heart. And those anattas are the seeds of material desires. The seeds of material desires. Everything actually rests upon desire. There's a very powerful purport in this regard in the fifth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. We could have a little read of that to get a very accurate picture. The purport of verse number 15, in which, well, it's in a series of verses describing the situation of the embodied living being. and the practices of the yogi. The verse says, nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. He's neutral. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their real knowledge. The word used in this verse, there's the word used in this verse of vibhu, which means the opulences of the Lord, but it also literally means the Supreme Lord himself, because there's no distinction between the Lord and his opulences. So in this purport, Srila Prabhupada explains, the Sanskrit word vibhu means the Supreme Lord, who is full of unlimited knowledge, riches, strength, fame, beauty, and renunciation. He is always satisfied in himself, undisturbed by sinful or pious activities. He does not create a particular situation for any living entity, but the living entity, bewildered by ignorance, desires to be put into certain conditions of life, and thereby his chain of action and reaction begins. Because we have to play by the rules. You have to accept the rules of the game. The rules of the game are the laws of karma. So by desiring to be put into certain conditions of life in the material world, because we are bewildered by the ignorance which now covers our true knowledge, then the chain of action and reaction begins. A living entity is, by superior nature, full of knowledge. Nevertheless, he is prone to be influenced by ignorance due to his limited power. The Lord is omnipotent, but the living entity is not. The Lord is vibhu, or omniscient, but the living entity is anu, or atomic. Because he is a living soul, he has the capacity to desire by his free will. That's a very important statement. Because he is a living soul, he has the capacity to desire by his free will. Such desire is fulfilled only by the omnipotent Lord. And so, when the living entity is bewildered in his desires, the Lord allows him to fulfill those desires, but the Lord is never responsible for the actions and reactions of the particular situation which may be desired. Being in a bewildered condition, therefore, the embodied soul identifies himself with the circumstantial material body and becomes subjected to the temporary misery and happiness of life. The Lord is the constant companion of the living entity as Paramatma, or the Supersoul, and therefore he can understand the desires of the individual soul, as one can smell the flavor of a flower by being near it. Desire is a subtle form of conditioning for the living entity. The Lord fulfills his desires as he deserves. Man proposes and God disposes. The individual soul is not therefore omnipotent in fulfilling his desires. The Lord, however, can fulfill all desires, and the Lord, being neutral to everyone, does not interfere with the desires of the minute, independent living entities. However, when one desires Krishna, the Lord takes special care and encourages one to desire in such a way that one can attain to him and be eternally happy. So this is a segue. This is the way we segue into tomorrow's verse, to understand that actually all desires are fulfilled by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even if the fulfillment of that desire is done through the agency of a demigod, or as we were reading the other night, by approaching some big gun in the material world. The Lord is within the heart of every living entity. There's some very powerful verses in that regard about the fulfillment of desires in chapter 7, you can have a look at. I won't read them today, but you can look in chapter 7, verses 20, 21, 22, and 23, and look at the purports there about how the Lord is within the heart and he sees the desire of the living entity and the desire of the living entity to have his desire fulfilled by a particular demigod. So the Lord makes his faith in that demigod strong, and then he fulfills that desire through the agency of the demigod as the super soul within the heart of the demigod. So ultimately, everything depends upon Krishna. So the conclusion that we're going to get from Sukadeva Goswami tomorrow is very powerful. It doesn't matter what you desire, approach the Lord. Now, the very important point about that is if we approach the Lord, who, as this purport today explains, is completely beyond the purview of the three modes of material nature, never affected by the material energy, always completely pure, then by association with the Lord, we become purified. And the Lord also assists in that, not just by us being in proximity to the Lord and becoming purified by infection of purity, but also the Lord responds to our sincere desire by removing the desire for material enjoyment from within our hearts. This is precipitated very rapidly by this process that we're engaged in now, by hearing about the Supreme Lord. Shrinvatam swakata Krishna punya shravana kirtana hridyanta sto hibhadrani vidunoti suhritsatam. The Supreme Lord is the Paramatma within the heart of every living entity, and he cleanses away the desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the truthful devotee. Now, the truthful devotee is the one who recognizes that his heart is still contaminated by material desires. He doesn't pretend, just because I'm a practicing devotee, that I am pure. Actually, the pure devotee always presents himself as the most fallen. Because on the one hand, we recognize, oh, my heart is contaminated. And even if, as we become purified of material desires, we also realize that the false ego is such that our desire for material enjoyments can become very strong again, very quickly. We should never underestimate this. So long as we are in the material world with a material body, Nectar of Devotion, at the beginning of chapter 16, Nectar of Devotion advises us that while within this material world, living within a material body, no matter how elevated our consciousness may have become, we should conduct ourselves as a neophyte. Because Maya is ruthless, the relentless, what is the word? The relentless onslaught, the relentless onslaught of the material energy is always there. Srila Prabhupada used to give the example, in like a needle and out like a plow. So long as we are in the material world, if we shift our focus in the slightest towards material activities, Maya is in. And he used to say, in like a needle and out like a plow. And I heard a lecture by Radhanath Swami where he brought that right into the 21st century, where he said, yes, in like a needle, but out like an intercontinental ballistic missile, a multi-warhead intercontinental ballistic missile. Just will blow your life apart if you're not careful. Your devotional life can be interrupted again. And that interruption may lead you on a sojourn in the material world that takes millions of years, millions of lifetimes to complete before you again come around to devotional service. So, Anyabilasita sunyam jnanam kamadyanavritam. Sunyam is to void these things out. Jnana kamadyanavritam. The desire for the results of philosophical speculation or fruitive activity these things have to be voided out. And the voiding process is by displacing these things with desires for devotional service. And those desires for devotional service get watered by the hearing process. But Lord Chaitanya warns Rupa Goswami in chapter 19 of the Madhya Lila of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Excuse me, my throat is terrible this morning. Lord Chaitanya says, Anatta Nivritti is so important because the watering process will also water the seeds of material desire that are still dormant within the heart. And those weeds have to be pulled out. Or as our dear friend, whose appearance day is on Thursday, Mahavishnu Goswami, used to say, you can either pull the weeds one by one, or you can flood the field, which is what they do when they're planting rice. Flood the field and plant the rice. And the roots of the rice are in the mud, and their leaves are in the air, and they grow that way. But all the seeds of weeds that are in the mud, they can't fructify because they're covered with water. So if we drown ourselves, literally drown ourselves in this hearing process, then we'll always be safe. We'll always be safe and secure. Couple of minutes left. Anybody have any quick questions or reflections? Charanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Krishna, thank you so much, Prabhu, for the class.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank
Hare
you.
Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank
Hare
you.
Krishna
Prabhu, thank you.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you.
I'll end the class now, Prabhu.